Good evening and welcome. My name is Judith Rusi Kirshner, and I'm Deputy Director for Education and Women's Board Endowed Chair. I can't tell you how delighted I am to welcome you all tonight to what's going to be a memorable dialogue between two sculptors. Martin Puryear, whose first exhibition in Chicago was in 1980, and whose exhibition we celebrate tonight, and our friend Theaster Gates, whose work brings such luster to our city. I want to first thank our exhibition sponsors, the Morton International Exhibition Fund and the Kemper Educational and Charitable Fund. And annual support for the Art Institute exhibitions is provided by the Exhibitions Trust, Kenneth Griffin, Robert M. and Diane Levy, Thomas and Margot Pritzker, Betsy Bergman Rosenfield, and Andrew Rosenfield, the Earl and Brenda Shapiro Foundation, and the Women's Board. And on behalf of all of those individuals, Douglas Druick and James Rondo, it is indeed a pleasure to welcome you to the Art Institute. I want to also acknowledge the hard work of our colleagues who made this evening possible: Fawn Ring and Carolina Kowalczyk, Erica Hubbard, and Tracy Button. Finally, our wonderful colleague, Mark Pascal, whose remarkable curatorial partnership with the artist shaped this beautiful exhibition, which the New York Times praised when it was in New York as intriguing for revealing process, enigmatic forms, the astounding craftsmanship, and humanistic spirit of Martin Puryear. We are all delighted to co-sponsor this event with the Leadership Advisory Committee, and it's my particular pleasure to introduce Dave Walker, who's co-chair of the LAC.
Thank you, Judith. On behalf of the Leadership Advisory Committee, I'd like to welcome everybody. What will certainly be an enlightening and inspiring evening. The Leadership Advisory Committee, or LAC, is the Art Institute's volunteer and auxiliary board that helps to promote and sustain diversity and inclusion at the museum. Part of what we do on the LAC is host or co-host public programs and extraordinary events like this, like bringing Martin Puryear and Theaster Gates together tonight. We are grateful to Martin and Theaster, and of course to you for attending. The conversation will last about 45 minutes. And from the artists, at this point, we've decided that because of time constraints, we won't be able to have any questions at the end. And so please, everyone, if you can at this time, silence your cell phones. And now let's also please welcome Janet and Craig Duchissois, Curator of Prints and Drawings, Mark Pascal.
So great to see such a big crowd here. Thank you very much for coming. Martin Puryear, whose work is the subject of the newly opened Art Institute exhibition, Martin Puryear, Multiple Dimensions, has invited Chicago-based artist Theaster Gates to have a conversation tonight. The artists share several things in common, including residence in Chicago and, very importantly, serious engagement with Africa at crucial moments in their development. Theaster Gates is a professor in the Department of Visual Arts and Director of Arts and Public Life at the University of Chicago. He is also the founder of the nonprofit Rebuild Foundation. His studio practice includes space development, performance, and object making, and his expansive list of media and processes was the inspiration for Martin's invitation to have a conversation together. The spirit, as I understand it, is to discuss their personal employment of craft and so much more, as two great artists who are aware of each other's gravitas and who would like to know more about each other. Please join me now in welcoming Martin Puryear and Theaster Gates in conversation.
I didn't discuss this with you at first, Theaster, but I'm going to use my seniority and full rank.
Yes, sir.
And I'm going to talk first and explain how this got started, which is I was approached with the hope that I would be involved in some kind of program in connection with my exhibition, which I hope you'll be able to see if you haven't already seen it in the special exhibitions gallery. And my first thought was, I would love to engage Chicago as it has evolved since I left it 25 years ago. And I couldn't imagine a more meaningful way to engage Chicago as it now exists without answering something that I've been interested in, curious about for a long time, which is Theaster Gates, who I knew about first having seen your work in a magazine article years ago of something that I was very attracted to, which was a pot, a ceramic jug, which I loved, vernacular ceramic crafts from the Appalachian tradition. And I thought I was enjoying an antique, and I read the article, and it was a pot that you had done, which was part of a conceptual art piece. That's when I first learned about you.
Right on.
And then I've read extensively more about you, gaining more and more curiosity. Then we got in touch with it. You phoned me, and we spoke over the phone a little bit. And so when I was asked about a program that I might be willing to do, I said, I'm going to do something that I want to do. I'm not going to do this as a job, as a public service thing. This is for me. I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to try to get Theaster Gates and talk to him and have a discussion, and it can be public.
Right on.
And I have to say, very personally, that I feel cheated that this is only 1 hour, because I think we could talk for a long, long time together. And I think a little bit of context from my own engagement in this moment is, as a person who's a generation or two older than you, Theaster,
Half a generation.
I can remember coming to New York in the 70s and before, and feeling so invisible as a black artist in New York, and being aware of the incredible discontent that was experienced and expressed by artists of color and women, to the extent that there was one artist I'm friendly with who made her work consist of tabulating the absence of artists of color in the New York galleries. Yeah. She, for years, was making charts, and that was her work. Charts showing minuscule percentages of black, minuscule percentages of female, minuscule percentages of Latino in the New York galleries. And I just want to, in passing, say that when I come to Chicago and have friends here, Theaster, who I've become, I think we're friends now?
I think so. I hope so. I mean, I'm your friend.
We've only met for a matter of minutes before this, face to face. And then I had a visit to Theaster's project, which I'm talking now because what I saw today is leaving me a little bit speechless, visiting Theaster's rebuild project. And so he may have a lot more to say than I do, but I'm trying to get my words in now. But I just think there's a moment it's worth recognizing that, and also mentioning that I was in went to Venice at the end of the summer to see the Biennale, the exhibition curated by Oakwe and Wiesor, who is now working at the Haus der Kunst in Munich, Germany. It's a Biennale like you'll never see again. And the presence of so many artists of color in that Biennale. I mean, we are not invisible anymore.
That's right.
I mean, we're not invisible. Chicago, we're not invisible. just the friends, I mean, Kerry James Marshall I've known since I lived here, in fact, before I came here. I met Nick Cave a little while ago. I mean, these are pillars of the Chicago art scene, and they're working in terms that I think not marginalized at all, central. And I'm going to stop talking in a minute.
Thank you.
But
just checking.
So I just think there's a lot that we can exchange.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna finish by saying that I know that your project is, I've heard the word social sculpture used to describe what you do. And I know that's a word that I think was the first associated with Joseph Beuys, the German conceptual fluxist sort of Germanic exponent of something which is like art de povera. It was a unique, amazing person. I saw him speak once in New York at the School for Social Research. Very, very magnetic person. When I see what you've done, I think that what you're doing in your social practice is social sculpture in a practical sense, not a utopian sense. It's completely practical, and it engages people where they are. And it's not a Pied Piper call for people to follow him and develop a utopian idea of what art can become. You're engaging people as they are.
If you keep talking, man, they're going to think I paid you to say all this stuff. I got enough problems in this city. Thank you. I mean, this is crazy. This is like my best dream ever. So I got two Martin stories then, since we on the first name basis and we friends now. Martin. The recent story of our meeting was that I was invited by the Chicago Transit Authority to do a work of art at 95th Street. Right before the CTA had asked me to do this piece, Martin had a piece up north, the Rosemont station, that was maybe it was called The Ring. Mm-hmm. It was a beautiful round piece that was made out of mahogany.
Laminated mahogany.
Laminated mahogany. Mm-hmm. And over the years, maybe it had been up there 20 years or more.
About 25 years it came, yeah.
Can you tell the difference between like my looseness and his tightness? Over the years, the piece had gone into disrepair. It had rotted, and it was becoming a liability. And so the Transit Authority had to dismantle the piece and get rid of it. And it was one of the first kind of public artworks I remember seeing when I would like go to the north side and bump around. So I called Martin timidly and asked, hey, this piece just came down. This piece was really significant to me. I got to do this work on the south side at 95th Street. Can I do a piece that allows me to remember or pay homage to these two Martins? That it would be my patron saint, Martin Puryear, along with a generation prior's patron saint that continues into perpetuity. So we talked for a little while. And then Martin says, let me think about this, and let's talk again like in a month. I was like, okay. So I think you called me back, or I called you back. We got back in touch a few weeks later, and Brother Martin said, yeah, Theaster, I've considered this, and no. I was trying to get me like a good Martin Puryear ready-made, like if Baldessari can do it with the Giacomettis, maybe I could have me like a Giacometti, Martin Puryear, Theaster Gates. He was like, no. The moment that I had a public encounter with you was when you came to Chicago to consider the DuSable Park. And I remember being in the audience. I was a young artist. I was knee deep in clay. I mean, I was a throwing machine in those days. And I remember there being it was a tough conversation, and I wanted you to actually talk a little bit about it, and then maybe I'd tell you what I remember of it. I didn't mean to come out the gate with the DuSable thing, but it's not like that. This is a conversation about abstraction.
Well, it does involve the Art Institute. I was approached before I left Chicago. I lived in Chicago, just a little background here. I lived in Chicago for 13 years. I came about 1978. And I taught at the University of Illinois for a number of those years, and then I began to just work in the studio and not teach any longer. Toward the end of my time here, I was approached by Neil Ben Ezra. This is around the time I was getting ready for a major survey which the Art Institute was organizing of my sculpture at this museum. And I was approached with the idea of a sculpture, a commemorative sculpture to honor or at least to acknowledge the life and presence in what is present-day Chicago of the first non-Native American, non-Indian person to make a permanent home in Chicago, which is Jean-Baptiste Pointe du Sable, who was a man of African ancestry, historically recorded as African ancestry. No known images of him were extant. And he is celebrated on the South Side, DuSable High School, DuSable Museum. He is nearly invisible in Chicago itself. He's the first non-native resident of what is now Chicago, visible only on the South Side, celebrated on the South Side. In my walking around on this visit a few days here, I ran across a pedestal, a bust on the banks of the Chicago River with the bronze bust, a likeness of a person, and a plaque. That's what recognizes Jean-Baptiste Pointe du Sable outside of the South Side of Chicago. There was talk when I was approached of a park, and I don't know what's happened to it since, because it's kind of, after several planning meetings that I've attended here, park planning meetings, landscape architect planning meetings, presentations of a sculptural memorial to DuSable, things got quiet. At a certain point, you have to move forward. You just have to realize that you have to just do your own work and not keep coming back for things which are going to be going on in perpetuity without any kind of resolution. So it's died. But I think what Theaster is referring to is, I think of a moment when I gave a talk to an audience. I'm not sure if it was this audience. It was at the Art Institute of Chicago. I had my model, and I talked about what I was trying to do with the model, and it was this. I felt, and there was pressure from numerous sides on me, because there were people who felt that as an artist who is known for abstract work, why is an abstract artist being asked to design a memorial to a person who needs to be represented? So it was a tight bind I found myself in, because I felt personally that one of the most important things for this monument to DuSable had to contain, embody, and make clear is, for the sake of Chicago, black Chicago, white Chicago, all of Chicago, is that the first settler in Chicago was a black man. And you don't do that by having a plaque with a text. You do it with something that an illiterate person can look at and see. So I felt very strongly that as a person who had come out of representation, I could, for this point, go back to representation and make an image that people could look at and understand the truth of this history. But I was having to explain it to people who know me as an artist who made abstract art. So there was a lot of suspicion about me having been chosen. Anyway, I think by the time I had made my presentation, some of the people who were most suspicious had come around to realizing that I could, in fact, operate under that mandate and fairly and do justice to what I felt and they felt needed to be expressed in this memorial. So I think that's what you were
Yes,
talking
sir.
about. So I was talking about abstraction, and the abstraction part of this is that I felt, and I think I used the example of African art when I was explaining how you can show certain human truths without making a portrait, because we don't know what DuSable looked like, and I felt it would have been a travesty to present a portrait of a person with a likeness, but I felt it was nevertheless possible and necessary to show DuSable as a person who had his origins in Africa. And that was so, to me, so important for the truth of this city to acknowledge.
Yeah.
That I was trying to grapple with that,
Yeah.
that struggle.
Well,
And-
let me tell you why. I'll tell you why I mentioned that. There's a way in which, so you say, I came out of realism. I was trained in a realist tradition. You said you could look at a thing, you could make it, and that was cool. And that was of your earliest experiences how you knew you were becoming an artist, is that you could lacquer, like bam, right? Mm-hmm. And then something happened, and you called that the art of your time. You said, then I realized that there was the art of my time. And like, what happened in that moment between, I know how to draw, I like these drawings, whoa, there's some other stuff going on. Like, do you remember that moment? Do you remember those moments when things were shifting for you?
It happened when I was in college. Mm-hmm. And I was a biology major for the first 2 years of college. But I had been drawing since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I was a biology major because I didn't know what an artist did to make a living.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, well, I can get a degree in biology and I can do something in that field and paint on the weekends. Mm-hmm. And then I began to hang out with art majors and realized that these people were preparing professionally to be artists, whatever that meant. I also saw people who were teaching. And I said, well, this is maybe a way that I can make a living, as I can teach. Yeah. And that means that I embrace my identity as an artist, and that's when I switched into art. But at that point, I came under the tutelage of one very eccentric woman, Nell Sonneman, from North Carolina. And she was very patient with me because I was wedded to reality, to realism. I had taught myself to paint with egg tempera, with wood engravings, all this sort of traditional techniques of making art. And I was so proud that I had this skill that I had taught myself from the time I was a kid. And I had looked at art books, and I was in love with Bruegel and the Flemish masters and Andrew Wyeth. Yeah. To my mind at that time, he was a living artist in my time who was working with this tradition of absolute mastery of depiction. Yeah. And this person said to me, she was very patient, but she said, your work could be a lot better if you understood abstraction. If you knew how to compose a picture and think of these things as elements rather than focus on the texture of fur or the way light falls on this, or the way shadows. I mean, she just said, you've got the bones of art here, but you don't see. And we struggled. We fought. Yeah. We fought. And I began to see in the work that I was admiring. I remember particularly looking at Hans Memling, a portrait of a woman, and how the shape of her veil was like And this connects to Ellsworth Kelly. Yeah. The way he subtracts these basic forms, But I was looking at them and I was getting obsessed with all the detail of, and I realized that if I could figure out how to make these elements work, I could compose a painting that had dynamism in it, rather than just the kind of accidental surface qualities that you get by pointing a camera at something and clicking it. And a good photographer does that with the selectivity of his vision, by finding these things, these structures that make the piece work as art, rather than simply as an accidental collection of textures and shadows and so forth.
But
so that's the moment, if you want to mention it.
No, that's sweet.
But it wasn't overnight. It was, like I said, this woman and I fought, and she retired, and we remained in touch.
Yeah.
And I saw her not long before she died. I went down to North Carolina. She retired, and we stayed in touch, and we really had a truce. At the end of it.
Yeah, y'all had to agree that. But you came around.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean.
Yeah. No, I'm an abstract artist now.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on.
Yeah.
But at that time too, you were also committed to two-dimensional work. Like things were.
That's where I started.
Right. Things were flattened and they got wild.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I think, like you, we both came up in a family where people were handy.
Yeah.
And my father, and I think your father, you said, was a roofer.
Yeah.
He's a tradesman. He
was busy.
He was
Hustling.
busy? Yeah. Well, my father was a postal worker. He was trained in high school, as far as he got, as an electrician. He came out of school and he was looking for a job as an electrical contractor.
Yeah.
No unions would have, in those days, he was shut out.
Yeah.
So he went to work in the post office in D.C., and that's what he did. But he was a handy father, and he had 7 kids, and when he needed something done around the house, he'd go to the library and get a book, go to the equivalent in those days of Home Depot or someplace and buy a few tools. And I grew up watching a man teach himself how to build things and do things. And that was invaluable to me.
Right on.
Yeah.
You know, this walking through the show with you and listening to you talk about some of your early work and the evolutions, it was really helpful for me to kind of chart, to see how an artist that I admire charts their life. In those moments, you know, they feel like clear chunks where it was like, you know, like a decision was made. And then like that decision was made based on a kind of ideological shift or a deepening, or you'd go to a place and allow yourself to be enthralled and absorb the things of that place, and then another shift would happen, and then and it's just like bam, 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 you know, and seeing the work go from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional, like there have been moments where I felt like you said it earlier, that there was a way in which, you know, the works on paper got to the point where like they just kind of needed to come off the paper. Like they became sculptural inside the paper, and then they just kind of, right? And by the time you got to grad school, and I think I experienced that too, where it was like I was making things in clay, or I was making things in 3-dimension, and I was trying to have these conversations about narratives about the world. And I was trying to do it symbolically, and it was like, what would happen is I'd make a thing, and it would like still not give me everything I wanted. But like the thing would kind of point at the world. And like more and more, I just kind of wanted to take it from 3-dimension to like another dimension. And so I would like take these symbolic narrative moments and then kind of convert it. It says like, oh, well, I could build a house out of clay. You know, could I transfer that into the construction of a house? If I want to deal with vacancy in the work, or I want to deal with certain kinds of inequalities that I see in the world, I would try it first symbolically, and then it's like, man, and so I think that in the same way, I've been trying to grapple with both sculpture and abstraction in that.
Yeah, I think we have some experiences formative experiences in common, and I think in the sense that I left the U.S. at a young age and went to Africa, which I think is like one of the most important experiences that I could have had. To finish college, go into the Peace Corps, and live among people who lived in the part of the world that stamped me. As a black American, this is the identity. This is the curse in a way, because it's an identity that, in a sense, in a very broad social sense, stigmatizes you without trying to blame anybody, but the truth is that it stigmatizes you, being black. It's a stigma, has been historically, remains so today. I'm not saying this in any blaming way, but it's just, if you just look at how society is operated in this country, that's the truth of it. And I didn't mean to really go on to this, but this is just the truth of it. I feel like race is a euphemism in our society. It's a euphemism because what it really embodies, you can almost answer the question when somebody says, "What are you? Who are you?" It's like, "Where are you?" It's about a place. Where in society do you fit? Rather than where do you happen? What do you happen? How will you happen to be born? How did you happen to be born? What did you happen to be born as?
Yes.
It's really more about where do you fit. But I got a little bit sidetracked. What was I talking about?
No, I mean, let's stay here, because.
But what I was talking about is the privilege I felt of going to Africa and living among these people, these Mende people. I was sent to teach at a small mission school in the Mende tribal area in Sierra Leone, and learned to speak their vernacular language is Creole, which is a language based on English. If I can say a little bit about Sierra Leone, Sierra Leone is one of two countries on the west coast of Africa to which slaves were repatriated from the West Indies, from Canada, and from the United States. They were sent back. And Sierra Leone and Liberia are two countries that had communities of African slaves who had been rinsed of their tribal identities, because the slaves were thrown together, different tribes were living together when they were on the plantations or wherever they were working, being made to work in the New World. Their tribal identities were eroded and in some cases erased. And they were sent back to Africa for various reasons and at various times. And the main community that was sent back to Sierra Leone settled in what became known as Freetown. And in Liberia, the origin of that word is liberty. And they settled in a city on the coast, Monrovia, named after James Monroe. And they were mostly American heritage slaves. The slaves who were sent back to Sierra Leone were British from the West Indies. Some of them came through Canada, black loyalists and various. But anyway, there was a community of Africans in Freetown who had no tribal language any longer. They had what became known as Creole, K-R-I-O. It's an African dialect, still spoken today, based on English. And so I lived among people, learned to speak Creole, was teaching French, English, biology in this high school, and getting to know tradespeople and so forth.
You weren't teaching art?
They thought I could only teach art.
Yeah.
I was sent there to teach art in this school that had need for really basic courses. I ended up teaching French and English and biology, and since I had an after-school job through high school and college of working in the library, the D.C. Public Library, I ran the library. I built up the library in the school and ran the library. It was two of the richest years of my life, and But you went to South Africa and studied in University of Cape Town, right?
I went to University of Cape Town, and you talked about being in Sierra Leone 3 years after independence.
Yes.
I was in Cape Town in '96, so it was like 2.5 years after Mandela's release. And I remember also this fervor and this excitement and the kind of hope that South Africans had about the new South Africa. Mm-hmm. And when I was at University of Cape Town, I had faculty by then. I could use my hands, and there were these brothers who were doing a lot of stuff in, maybe it was St. George's Square, like in the main square. They were making tourist art, and some of them were potters. So I was like, oh, maybe I could work with the Cape Town City Mission, and learn a little bit of like the local, like there was a bunch of Shona sculpture. There was a lot of Zimbabwean stone stuff happening. Yeah. But I was really kind of interested in like helping them freak, like making their clay things better. And so we spent a lot of time kind of doing that stuff. But it was a magical time for me because I was there on a Rotary Scholarship. The Rotary Scholarship, when you converted the dollar to the rand, I was like rich, right? And it was like, I was like broke as all out when I left. And then I had temporary cash. And then like you couldn't take the money when you left. So I was like, I'm just gonna stay here for a while. and it was this kind of interesting moment where Black South Africans, once they realized and believed, because at first they thought I was like a Black South African fronting as an American, which like I almost got mobbed by these brothers. But I was like, no, for real. And they were like, yo, you're not. I was like, man, I'm about as black as that kind of black gets. I'm really ghetto black. I know I don't sound ghetto black, but guys, I'm really ghetto black. and I just remember falling in love with the possibility that black could be something so much more complicated, and just by like shifting context, the way that I am, the way I imagined myself and the way that I was imagined had shifted. Mm-hmm. And I remember, I just remember that being really liberating for me.
Well, I've had something similar when I was in Sierra Leone, and I think that's true of anybody who travels, particularly any person of color who travels outside of a very stratified society that they're brought up in, and realize that these categories and these divisions and these ways that people define themselves are so fluid, and they are not fixed, and we grow up with them and we think they're fixed, and we go to a place like Brazil or South Africa, and we realize, like in South Africa, I wouldn't be a black person, I'd be colored.
Yeah.
You know, in South Africa, people who are clearly mixed race, and I'm not saying this is better or worse than what we've got.
Yeah.
It's just different.
Yeah.
And we've got a binary system between black and white. If you have any trace of African ancestry, you're over here, and you can't go over there.
Yeah. You'd be better in South Africa. I'm just, I'd be worse. You'd be better.
And you go to Brazil, and there's all these different categories with names. And in Brazil, I was down there in, I think, '89. I represented the U.S. in the Sao Paulo Biennale.
Yeah.
And this is ironic because there was a Brazilian commissioner for that exhibition who was really offended that they hadn't sent somebody important like Frank Stella or somebody like that, you know. And it was really interesting. And the upshot of it was very strange for him because I was awarded the first prize. Not that prizes mean anything to me at all. I didn't even know they were giving prizes then, but I did get first prize. And I realized, I talked to a lot of people down there, and I met some black Brazilian artists. Yeah. And I met a lot of Brazilian artists who were quite prominent. And in Brazil especially, it's very hard to be an artist, just about as hard as it is here, because it's financially hard. But the Brazilian artists who I met who were doing very well, they came from money. Mm-hmm. They were very wealthy families. And they were the people who put the artists out, and they were the successful ones. And I heard this expression, speaking of how people are categorized, talking to a Brazilian. One woman gave me a copy of Time magazine. It was all in Brazilian Portuguese. She said, and it was an article about the black people in Brazil, the blacks in Brazil, and how they were finally coming into consciousness as a people. Because Brazil had this idea that there was no racism. There's no racism. We're all Brazilians. And yet all the poor people in Brazil were black. Yeah. And it just happens that,
that trick worked.
Yeah. And this woman gave me an expression. She said, we have an expression. She said it so openly as though it were just a fact of life in Brazil. Money whitens. If you're wealthy, you move up. There's no racism here, but if you're wealthy, you move up.
Yeah.
Wow. So these things are so rigid if you're born into them and if you buy into them.
Yeah.
But you have to get out to realize that these are structures that are created.
Yeah.
And they're created to keep certain people in some places and allow other people to have. And it requires a very strange, W.E. Du Bois talks about it, this double consciousness.
Yeah.
In order to not go insane,
yes,
you have to understand how you're seen, but you can't buy into it.
Yeah. It makes me think, Martin, about there's a way in which you're learning all these things, we learn all these things, but we go to a place, we absorb it, and then in addition to the craziness of those places, the complicatedness of race and class, it also has the capacity to transform how we make. And I feel like, the richness of those cultures become evident in your work, and evident in your ethic about working, and in your values about why a thing should be made. Right? And when I was walking through the space today, there was just moments where you could see an exorbitant amount of time and thought in advance of a cut that would then make the cut. And you were talking about craftsmanship earlier. You were talking about, and it's beautiful to hear, somebody out of a deep, rich sculptural tradition talking about tools in their hands and making. I just wanted you to kind of reflect. I just like hearing you talk about your shop, talk about the furniture in your house. I want you to, can you just talk about making a little?
Well, I'm going to talk about what I saw today in your place, because
I tried to set them up,
because they can go see the show and they can see what I do.
They want to talk. They want to. Okay.
But I'll say this: I see what you're doing, and we both spent time in Japan. How long were you in Japan?
Over the 5 years, maybe about a total of 1.5 years, 2 years.
Yeah. See, I went to Japan once early on, partly being attracted to the material culture of the Japanese, the incredible depth of culture in their architecture, the shrines, the temples, the history of pottery, the reverence they have for potters, weavers, all of the incredibly deep material culture traditions they maintain there, right alongside their incredible lightning fast adaptation of the latest gasp of modernity and cyber this and digital that. They're amazing society. So we both had that experience. And I've gone back numerous times myself. I love that culture. But I think this is where we diverge, and this is where I feel it's so interesting to want to talk to you. Because I think I have continued as a maker to focus in. Mm-hmm. I've got 2 people working for me. Mm-hmm. I work with my hands. Mm-hmm. I work slowly. God, all my galleries are just so angry. Why can't you produce more work, faster? I mean, I work the way I work.
Yeah.
And I look at what I saw today. It's like I was saying how I think of my work as something like that. I look at you, your enterprise, as something like it goes 360 degrees all the way around. I mean, you've got society that you're shaping. I mean, this is what I talk about social sculpture. You're shaping society, and I'm going to say this to you, as a maker, I wish for you the time. I can't see how the hell you do it. To be an artist. How can you be an artist when you're shaping such a huge swath of humanity with this incredible, tasteful craftsmanship and architectural sophistication, social sophistication, urban planning sophistication? How do you do it?
I mean, but Martin,
how do you do it?
I think you're actually hitting it. I think you're hitting the thing that becomes this fork in the road for how we imagine our practices. That you just said, urban planning sophistication, architectural this. I am always being an artist. Like the bank is sculpture. The bank isn't a bank. It's not an architectural wonder. It's not a zoning conundrum. It's not a economic challenge. It is a series of problems that I work out in my studio the way that a three-dimensional or a two-dimensional artist would play out a project. It just happens that mine has a couple more moving parts, a little bit more, a few more widgets. It's kinetic in that one part has to connect to the other in order for the thing to move right. That I don't feel burdened by this. I don't feel like I've missed something when I have to go to a city meeting. There are times when I long to be in the studio, but there are times when I long for cheese grits. There are times when I'm in a meeting and I gotta pee and I just long for a bathroom, right? But I really feel like the thing that you're saying falls outside of the studio is in fact the thing. And so I was telling Gene earlier, one of the times I went to Japan, met this brother, he was about 65. He was a beginning potter. One day he comes to the pottery class and he says, I said, well, what you doing? And he's like, I went to look at my land. I'm building a studio for myself when I retire. And I was like, well, when you gonna retire? And he was like, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. He was 65, right? And it was like he was building an amazing pottery studio, right? And it was like, and he had so much grace with himself about not being a very good, he was like, I have 10 years to learn how to be a potter. And then I have another 15, 20 years to be a potter in my new space. I was like, yeah, right? And it was actually those moments when I came back to Chicago, I was at Lil Street, the pottery space where I was making. I didn't have enough money to afford my studio, kiln time, my mortgage, my Volkswagen. I couldn't afford it, so I had to stop making pots. And I said, I will make pots when I can afford my own studio. And so I put clay down, and then I started using whatever was around because I was broke. And it was at that point that I started using these other materials that was not the thing that I knew very well. It was not my discipline. It was not my love. I was just trying to keep busy and out of trouble. That it was at that point that the contemporary art world was like, he is an artist. And it's like, well, if I thought I was an artist when I was a potter, and I think I'm an artist now, and then they say the only time I was really an artist was when I was making these things in between, then it's really confusing, And so I think that, and it's not to try to justify Martin that anything one does is an artistic practice. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, like, if we were talking about the pleasure that one has when they kind of conceive of a big problem and solve it, or the way in which you sketch out form after form until you resolve the right form for the right context, that in a way, I had to think about the bank in that way. That it was like, well, once I build the bank, well, what should go in the bank? And I needed something that could, like, be worthy of the structure. And it was like, but once that's in the bank and that ain't gonna make no money, and then I do the stuff on the first floor, that ain't gonna make no money, then, like, what's the economics of the bank? And that those problems for me gave me the same euphoric, artful feeling. They gave me the same artful feeling if it wasn't art. It gave me the same artful feeling that being in the studio would. And so then the question was, well, what do I have to do today? And the way that I know that I'm an artist, the way that you're an artist, is that I wake up sometimes at 4:30 in the morning, wake up at 5 in the morning, and I don't feel tired. It's not like a chore that I have to go before my team comes to. It's a pleasure to go and just have 3 hours alone in the morning. And I probably get that kind of time in more than most artists get to be artists. I don't have the luxury, and this is maybe this is black, maybe this is messianic. I don't have the luxury of just having a studio practice right now.
Well, I see that this is where I said this is where we diverge.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what you're doing. I just cannot understand how. I don't understand how a person can do it. I'm in awe of it, and the fact that you're also. I mean, I can see. I have no problem saying that what you're doing in your larger, expanded sense of practice is art. I have no problem saying that's art. I think it is. It's art in the most. And also, have you heard about Assemble? Do you know Assemble?
Yeah.
In Liverpool,
yeah,
right? Yeah. Assemble is a.
They won the tape. They
got the
Turner Prize
in England.
Yeah.
It's a art collective in Liverpool, and I wonder if they saw you and they started to do what they're doing after seeing.
Let's say so.
Let's say so. Yeah, this is an art collective. Very much, they're buying up buildings, often buildings that they're sweeping up just before they get leveled by developers to turn into gentrified or condominium subdivided, urban renewed. They're buying them, old housing stock, old industrial stock,
Yeah.
turning them into art forms. Is that 5 minutes, Mark? Oh, okay. See, that's what I said. This was too short.
Yeah.
It's too short. But anyway, turning them into art spaces. They're also making craft items, making clay things, making furniture, which they sell. So it's very much in the same model. And I mean, they got the Turner Prize. So somebody thinks it's art over there, too.
Yeah. Hey, Martin, since we have 4 1/4 minutes, this is a new friendship, and it feels like more and more there's the possibility of a kind of generational friendship, right? A kind of one that's absolutely necessary. Like, it's necessary that the things that are in your head are in other people's heads, like the experiences that because whether you can acknowledge it or not, your practice has made room for our practices. Like when you were at that meeting talking about DuSable, you said we all come through Brancusi. We all do come through Brancusi, but we also all come through you. If there's any one of us that have any ambition around black sculpture, the possibility of an expanded sculptural practice, of reskilling, we come through you.
As opposed to de-skilling.
Yes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on legacy and friendship.
I want to live it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to live it.
Yeah.
As an artist, I'm sort of in the old school because I'm solitary. Work in the studio, try to have those quiet moments, which I hope you manage to get for yourself. I don't see how it's possible, but I have seen your workspaces. I know if you got there, you could do amazing things, but when you're not doing meetings and stuff, but I just wish that for you.
Aw.
So you could pass that on as part of your legacy. I mean, you're leaving an amazing legacy for that neighborhood, for that whole area of Chicago with what you started, the possibilities that you're showing people down there. I think that's revelatory.
I'm going to say something off the cuff since the First Lady is here. I hope that we will return to this idea of your sculpture and of you having a strong presence in the city of Chicago. And if that means that we have to expedite certain bureaucratic processes, that sometimes expansive bureaucratic tendencies are necessary in order for great art to happen, ladies and gentlemen. Martin Puryear.
Theaster Gates.